The telephone rang recently in the middle of the night. As I answered the phone, I glanced at the clock. It was after 3 a.m. I did my best to say hello, but I'm usually pretty groggy at that time of night. I know from experience that at that time of night, it's either an emergency or it's a wrong number. The person on the other end of the phone seemed surprised and asked, "Who is this?" Used to be that I would answer that question, but I don't do that anymore, at least not at 3 o'clock in the morning. Instead, I asked, "Who are you calling?" And I got the expected response, "Isn't this the cookout?" You see, our numbers are very close, and if you just switch 2 digits, you get the Kirby's instead of the cookout. And in case you didn't know it, the cookout really is open at that time of the morning. So I replied, as I've learned to say, "No, this isn't the cookout. Check your number. I think you just misdialed." Who is this? As annoying as an exchange that is every time it happens, it is the central question of our Palm Sunday story in the Gospel of Matthew. Who is this? Now you have to remember what was going on in the city of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago when Jesus came in. We're told by the Gospel that it's the week leading up to the Passover feast. So there are lots of people that have come to Jerusalem to celebrate, thousands and thousands of visitors in Jerusalem. And they are a religious crowd. They know the stories of the Scripture. So they know the donkey in Zechariah represents the way a victorious king enters the city. They know the people throwing their coats on the ground represent loyalty to a new king, according to the book of Kings in the Old Testament. They know that the palms were used to greet that great revolutionary Judas Maccabees just 200 years earlier, and they live in a day of great expectation when they're looking for a descendant of David to regain the throne in Jerusalem and set them free the way Judas Maccabees did. So the question, who is this, is pretty straightforward. They're really asking, who is it this time who thinks he can defeat Rome and save us? Others have tried and failed. Who is this one? That's still the question. Who is this? The prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee? Who is this that claimed to be a king without a throne? Who rode into the city victoriously on Sunday and died ignominiously on Friday? On Confirmation Sunday, it seems particularly appropriate to be able to answer the question, who is this Jesus? A few years ago, a young woman named Deborah showed up early to open the bookstore where she worked. She noticed a man dressed in traditional clothing of a Hasidic Jew. He approached the door and asked if he could come in. Well, it was early for the store to open, but he appeared to be in need of something right away, so she let him in, and she asked if she could help him. He spoke softly. "Yes, I want to know about Jesus." It's not an unusual question for that bookstore. They specialize in religious books, so she led the man to the section of books about Jesus. She showed him the popular ones, and she showed him the scholarly ones, and then she turned to leave him to find just the right book. He called her back. "No," he insisted. "I want to know about Jesus the Messiah. Don't show me any more books. You tell me what you believe. Deborah later said she was terrified. She said her Episcopal soul shivered. She had almost never been asked to put her own beliefs into words. Who is this Jesus? You tell me what you believe. There's a favorite story that I've told many times, and I tell it every year on the confirmation retreat. A professor, Donald Miller, is teaching a college class on Christianity. He asked the class, "What do you need to believe in order to be a Christian?" The class offers all sorts of ideas about God and humanity, sin and redemption, Jesus' death and resurrection, and he writes it all on the board in the classroom. And then he asks another question. Is it possible for a person to believe all of this and still not be a Christian? And they concede it might be possible for someone to say they believe it but not be a Christian. So he says there's something still missing, and he gets up and he erases the board. And he sits staring for a couple of minutes, and finally he suggests a different beginning. What would a guy need to believe? Or what steps would he need to take to get a girl to fall in love with him? Then he wrote on the board, a guy would have to get to know her. According to Donald Miller, becoming a Christian is more about building a relationship than it is preparing for a test. Now, our confirmands can tell you that they've been at this since the end of the summer. We hope that they can recite the Apostles' Creed, pray the Lord's Prayer, maybe recite Psalm 23, John 3:16, a few other things that they've been working on with their mentors. They worked on all the books of the Bible. But in the end, becoming a Christian might look a lot more like falling in love than it does taking a test. This year, the Presbyterian Women's Bible Study has engaged in a fascinating approach to the question, who is this? Who is Jesus is the name of the study. And we've looked at Jesus according to what the early Christians wrote in the Bible. We've looked at Jesus according to what the early Christians wrote and didn't get into the Bible. Recently, we've looked at what Jews and Muslims say about Jesus. And I've been fascinated by the fact that in the Quran, Muslims are taught to believe in the virgin birth of Jesus by Mary. They are taught that Jesus performed miracles. They are taught that Jesus was a great prophet. Jesus of Nazareth from Galilee. But Muslims do not have a relationship with Jesus. He's not the Son of God. At most, they follow his ideas. They don't follow him. The difference for Christians is that we know Jesus and we follow him. Or to put it another way, it's not really a matter of how the crowds in Jerusalem answered the question, who is this? At some point, it doesn't matter whether they got the question right or wrong. Now, what really matters is, who is this to us? How do we answer when someone says, close the book, tell me who Jesus is to you? Who is the Jesus you know? Who is the Jesus you follow? Little Nathaniel was only 2 years old when he asked his father the inevitable question, "Daddy, what God mean?" Daddy was Miroslav Volf, an internationally known and respected Christian theologian and author. And for a moment, he reacted the way every parent does. He didn't know what to say. But then he recovered, and he began talking about God creating the world, the sky, the water, the animals, everything. God created everything. Afterward, Volf really wasn't satisfied. He felt like he'd been talking past his 2-year-old son. He should have been able to explain God to a 2-year-old. Well, some would wonder if we can explain God at all. A friend tried to console him, saying, "It's more important for children what you do than what you say." And Volf thought that was partly right, but words are still important. Words and actions had been important in his own life of faith and in the faith of his family. You see, Volf's father was born to Christian parents prior to World War II in Europe. His father lost his faith as a young man, found himself in a concentration camp during World War II, which only confirmed his loss of faith. Yet there in the camp, there was this one prisoner who was different, who changed his mind. Daily they shared the same hunger. Daily they shared the same humiliation. Daily they faced hard labor. Yet this other prisoner had eyes that seemed to be full of life. He had hands that never wearied in helping other people. His words were filled with faith. Faith in Jesus and confidence that the love of God would overcome the horrors of war and the hell of imprisonment. Volf's father found faith in the concentration camp, and his faith never wavered after. Words and actions had been important in his following Jesus. As a teenager in Eastern Europe, Miroslav Volf had his own time when he struggled as a young person, questioning his faith. His father remained constant, but he says it was really his mother who brought him back to faith. He remembers his reckless years, his rebellion, and he remembers his mother's prayers. He wrote, "Every evening when her prodigal son would go out, she would wait on her knees in prayer until he returned." Now, Volf prays that his son will find a deep and lasting Christian faith. Volf has written, "I want him to embrace Christianity as a faith by which you can live and for which you can die." Not that he wants his son to have to die for the Christian faith, but he wants his son's relationship with Jesus Christ so important that he would follow Jesus regardless of the consequences. Who is this? This Jesus who comes into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. Who is this Jesus who comes into our lives, into bookstores and classrooms? It's Jesus Christ who offers his life so we can know life abundant life eternal. It's Jesus Christ who invites us to follow Him always, regardless of the consequences, and promises always to be with us, regardless of the circumstances that we face throughout our lives, promising to take us home in the end to be with God.